The season of Easter is miracle season as we follow the schedule of reading that the lectionary provides. So it starts with Easter, of course, and the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. And then in week 2, we have the story of Jesus appearing in the midst of a locked room, boom, in the midst of the disciples, and then breathing the Holy Spirit on them through that story. Last week we had another story of Jesus up and walking around, and he's on the beach, and the disciples are out in the sea, and he points them to a miraculous catch of fish, and they start fishing on the other side of the boat, and they pull in this huge catch of fish. And we spent our time with the conversion of Saul, and that's complete with a light show and a voice of Jesus from heaven, and the conversion of Saul, who is the person that the early Christians fear the most, and he becomes the person who is the most important leader in the life of the church. Now, today, we have a story of resurrection. We have a simple story of Peter being a conduit of the power of God. And all of these stories are stories of God doing amazing things. But this one's just a little bit different because Peter is just a normal disciple. He's fallible, at times cowardly, sometimes dim-witted. But here he is raising the dead. The story that we read today from Acts is simple and beautiful. Just before this story, what leads up to it, Peter's traveling through Lydda and then also Joppa, and that's just northwest of Jerusalem. And in Lydda, he meets a man named Aeneas who's been paralyzed for 8 years, and he's laying on his bed. And Peter goes in to meet Aeneas, and he says, Aeneas, Jesus Christ heals you. So get up and make your bed. Start tidying up around here, he says. And Aeneas gets up and makes his bed. And then the people in Lydda start believing in Jesus and the power that's flowing through Peter. And then, as our story picks up for today, Peter goes to Joppa. And we're told that in Joppa, there's a woman named Tabitha, or Dorcas in Greek. And either in Aramaic or Greek, this name means gazelle. So we have this image of a beautiful and graceful woman. And she's devoted to good works and works of charity, we're told, and she falls ill unexpectedly and dies. And the disciples hear that Peter is just next door in Lydda, and they want Lydda to come and help out their sister Tabitha in any way that he can. So they go and get Peter, and he comes, and he arrives. And when he arrives, he sees this sad but beautiful scene, because all the widows of that community are around Tabitha's body, and they're weeping. And they're wearing the tunics that she's made for them. See, the widows in ancient society were the vulnerable ones. They didn't have a husband to provide for them, and so they were vulnerable. They were in danger. And the community of Jesus' followers are inviting the widows in to care for them and to live out the realm of God and show them the grace and mercy of God. And Tabitha is the one who does the concrete acts of mercy. She makes them the clothes. She provides the food they need. She drives them to the doctor's visits as they need that. And she also sits with them when they're lonely. And they're gathered around her body. And they're grateful. And they're weeping. And they're also scared, perhaps, wondering who is going to care for them now. So Peter sends everybody out of the room. And then kneels down and prays. And says, Tabitha, get up! And up she gets. Peter helps her out of the room. Everyone sees she's alive. And more people in Joppa start to believe in Jesus too. And then Peter goes and stays at Simon the tanner. And what we may not know is that if you're a tanner in ancient Israel, then you have the blood of animals on you because of your trade, and you're seen as unclean. And that's setting up our story for next week as we go through Acts. So Peter stays with a man on the margins, and he brings a woman who cares for widows back to life. The story is telling us once again that the life-giving power of God is not reserved for the powerful in the world, but is also for, even especially for, the down and out, the forgotten, the powerless. Throughout the season of Easter, as we've been thinking about these miracle stories and talking through them, I've been making the case that the message these miracle stories are sending isn't that a long time ago something amazing happened. But the message is that through the power of God, amazing things happen. These stories are directing us to God's movement in our lives and in our world today. So if we have trouble making that leap of faith with the miracle stories and believing that everything happened, we can set that aside as far as I'm concerned. But there's still a leap of faith that these stories will encourage us to make. These stories invite us to believe that God's life-giving power can find us when we are down and out. These stories invite us to believe that God's life-giving power can find us when we are the forgotten ones. We're invited to believe that God's power can find us when we feel powerless in the face of all that life can throw at us. And we're also invited to believe that we can be Peter, that as ordinary disciples, we can bring some small part of the world back to life, back from the dead, simply by living out our faith. How we come to believe that God can bring us back to life, or that our faith can make a life-changing difference, is ultimately a mystery. But I think we have to experience this power either ourselves or through the stories of others. We need to hear these stories of God's power changing lives, and we need to share our story of God's power touching us as well. These stories of life change us. They stretch our understandings of not just what was possible in biblical times, but what is possible through God now.